Welcome to Softree's first webinar of 2017 about RoadEng template components. This seminar is going to provide you with a better understanding of RoadEng template components and how they can be used to create cross-sections. Now, really, components are the building blocks of our cross-section template, and the parameters for each of those components are basically their controls. So what Craig's going to be doing today is going to be taking a deeper look into this section, which is probably one of our most common support questions we get. But once you get a good solid understanding, they're actually a pretty easy part of the software. So what Craig is going to be covering today, he's going to be taking a look at the template editor, creating and testing templates and components, look at surfaces and layers, template processing and the merge surface, connections, and then, of course, taking a look at our e-library and some stuff on fixed sections. I did just want to take a quick second to show you some online resources that are available for templates and template components, and that is through our knowledge base. I'm just going to exit out of this PowerPoint. So here we've got our Softree knowledge base. If you go into the location module, you can actually access a whole section on template. I'll just scroll down here. Here's our template section. And this has examples and answers to questions you might have and some additional information, as well as a little bit more detail on what's contained in the e-library that Craig is going to show you today. So our e-library has a whole bunch of different components available to it. You can click on any one of those and get visuals and additional information on the components that are available within the software. So take a look at this one here. It shows you the typical cross-section, and it also gives you a better understanding of what some of the parameters that come with this template are. Yeah, so that's just a resource that you've got available. And of course, we always do this, but a little bit of a plug for some of our other upcoming webinars. We have RoadEng for County Engineers coming up next, Softree Optimal, and then Multi-Plots are the next ones. And of course, we're adding them all the time. So feel free to check back to the webinar section of the website. And with that, goodbye, Echo. I'm going to pass it over to Craig.
Thanks, Erin. Just a second to get my screen sharing going here. There we go. Hopefully, you should all be now seeing my screen. So I've done this presentation a few times before, and it's kind of difficult to do this presentation and go into a lot of detail with a sort of a variety of different applications that the audience is typically doing. But what I hope to do is to show you guys some concepts. Erin already pointed you at some resources we have on our website. So my plan is to show you some concepts that will help you put things together yourself. So let's get started. Template editing. In what I've got here is a highway design. I had a variety of different types of projects to try and demonstrate. This is kind of generic. It's about 10 kilometers of road. It's not super steep ground, quite a wide cross section, and yeah, so that's what I'm going to work with. And all the stuff that's done in templates in RoadEng is done in one of two places. We have what's called the template editor, edit templates, and it brings up a screen with a cross section. And the other place that cross sections are manipulated is in what's called the section editor or fixed section editor, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But I'd say the hard part of templates is right here. And what we've got on the screen, you can see we've got a rural highway cross section and a default template, which is whatever it is. The little check mark beside the rural highway tells me that this is the template that's been assigned to, or it is assigned in this design. In fact, it's the only template that's designed. But if you had a whole bunch of different cross sections and you'd assign them to different ranges of stations, you would see all those ones that were assigned with a little check mark beside them. So what is a template? As Aaron mentioned, a template is a collection of template components. And here I've got Rural Highway, and it's got template components, Rural 1, Ditch, and so on. One of the things that we have available with these components is we have a library that we keep online, and it's constantly updated. And some of the things that Aaron showed you came from the eLibrary. So I'll just click on that. And here I've got a whole collection of stuff that I can grab off the internet directly. And it's a good thing to update this from time to time, because these folders and components are always changing and improving. And so it's good to get the latest copy of them. If I click on this info button, you will see basically what Aaron showed you, components and their description and parameters and so on. So it's well worth exploring that. Let's just bring in this library. So I'll just load it up. Now I've got these template component folders, and inside each one of them there's all these different components. So the concept is really to mix and match these things together to form a cross-section that it does what you want. And in this environment, in the template editor environment, you can play around a little bit. You can see how a template behaves. A lot of people think of a cross-section as just, do I just draw up a cross-section? But these templates have a behavior, so that if I move the cross-section up, oh, the ditch has disappeared. It knew enough to create the ditches as soon as it got within a certain range of a cut. So this environment lets you play around with a template and see how it behaves in different ground situations. There's actually a window here I can click on, and it will give me a whole bunch of ground situations. So this cross-section, I can see in this situation, it's behaving here on a steep side hill. So it's a sandbox, and that's, yeah, a very useful way to investigate your template. So let's create a new template. So how would I do that? I would just go Add. I've got this one selected, so when I click on Add, it's actually going to create a copy of that template as a starting point. Have to give it a name, and what do I call this? Let's call it lane widening left, because that's how I'm going to change it. Okay, so here it is down here, and if you look inside, you'll see it's got all the stuff that the other one had. But in this, let's go back to single screen here. This one, I'm going to go to this rural left component. I'm going to look at its properties, and this is where all the parameters for that component are saved. And I can look at different parameters, and you see if I click on the parameter over here in the window, it shows me, or tries to show me. It's not always possible to show you where that parameter is on the cross section, and if you change it, what it's going to influence. So let's suppose here I increase this, let's say, I don't know, 6.5 meters widening. So there you can see I've widened the left-hand side of the road, and I have now a new widening. And notice that it doesn't have a check mark beside it, and that's because it's not been assigned yet. So let's come out of the template editor. I just press OK. All the templates that are involved with this design are saved with the design. Didn't really need to do that recalc, but there we go. It's pretty quick. And now I'm going to assign that new template. And I just had a note here somewhere. There we go. Templates. I'm going to assign the lane widening left, and I'm going to assign it just for fun between 4,000 and 5,000. Nice round numbers. So I've got from the beginning of the alignment, which I believe is 0, to 4,000 as the rural highway. I've added the lane widening on the left from 4,000 to 5,000, and then back to the standard template. Press OK. Recalculates. And let's just simplify the plan window here. I'll turn off the background. And if I go to station 4,000, which is somewhere in about here, I should start to see the road widening. It's plan options, road edges. Let's make these a little darker. Oh, there we go. There we go. Just bad eyes. That's all I did. And the scale, of course. So you can see coming along here that we're at a normal width, and then we get to station 4,000 and it widens very abruptly, which is obviously not what you'd want to do for a highway. And let's fix that. There's the other end of that template zone. So to fix that problem, I'll go in and assign parameters by range. I'm going to add a taper, which is a default template that always exists that allows you to taper between two templates. One little caveat is that the templates should be similar. It doesn't really make sense to taper between a rock wall and a road in any sensible way. So that the taper template should apply to two templates that are somewhat similar. So let's just go ahead here, let's say 3950, go back 50 meters to 4,000, and put a taper in there, and on the other side from 5,000 to 5050, another 50-meter taper on the other end. So now I've got highway, taper, lane widening, taper, highway. Okay, so let's just do that, recalc. And now, instead of that abrupt change, I should see a 50-meter taper in around 4,000. Where is that? A bit hard to see now that it's tapering over that distance. But if you go through the cross sections, you'll see that you can see there on the left, should be able to see that road is getting wider into the transition. So just to recap, I created a new template, copied it from the other one. I changed one of the parameters, made it wider, and then I applied that. And you can do this for all kinds of things, ditch depth, slopes, and everything. It's very straightforward. Yeah, it's probably the most common way people manipulate templates. Okay, let's go on to some more conceptual things. Let's talk about template components and how they're formed and what they do. First of all, template components are like miniature programs. We create them. It's actually, some users do create them, but I don't recommend it. It's complicated stuff. It's like computer programming, and most people that I know and clients that we work with don't want to avoid that sort of stuff. So we try to build the libraries so that they're reusable and they don't have to get into the customization. But if you're curious, if you customize one of these things, convert stock component to a custom component, and you look inside it and you'll find it's full of all kinds of crazy things and options that I can't begin to explain. But essentially, it's like a miniature program that tells it how to behave and how to change and become smart. And one of the concepts about template components, there's a concept of surfaces. I know you see here there's different layers in this template component, and if I hover in this area, you'll see that it says cut subgrade, and it's got an area, and then below that it's got fill SRF1. So if I just shade that, let's just do that, shade that. There is the cut area that I'm talking about, and turn the cut area off. If I hover in here, I can hatch the fill area. So there's a fill area. In fact, I can hatch all the fill areas. There we go. You can see the different types of materials. And if you report the volumes, which I can do just to show you quickly, you'll see that your volume table is got different surfaces in it. So the main volume here, some people call this just dirt volumes, subgrade volumes, cut fill volumes. This main area, which is all the cut, is reported under subgrade cut. And if I was in a fill section, here, that material there would be subgrade fill, so counted as subgrade fill. So those two are the big earthwork items. The others, layer 1, layer 2, are your surfacing materials typically, and they're pretty constant. They're not all that interesting, but they can be very expensive. Sorry, going to interrupt it there. So yeah, that's one of the things that template components do for you, is they have these concept of layers. So yeah, there's another concept that's quite important, and that would be how components interact with each other, how they're connected, and how they actually operate. So in this rural highway template, got all these other components. You see them. And there is a particular order to these things. You can't just move them around willy-nilly. They have an order. And the reason they have an order, I'll just show you something that doesn't look there. I've got a ditch coming off the center line, and then I've got the roadway component forming after that. So there's definitely an order to these, and you've got to be aware of that. The reason there's an order is because of the way that the template's constructed, and there's a concept of what we call the merged surface, which is it's probably easiest just to illustrate. I'm going to display the merged surface. So that's the merged surface after the entire template has been applied. If I go through the components here, essentially you start with the ground surface or your strip surface as the merged surface, and then you apply a component. And there, in this case, I've applied the rural left one, and you can see my merged surface now goes up to the top of all my layers. And after I apply the next component, the merged surface extends out. So it's building up this merged surface as it goes. And that surface is used by other components quite often to close to or do things to. So there's definitely a concept of merged surface which you should be aware of. The other thing that is sort of basic principle of components is that they connect to each other or connect in some way to the alignment. For example, the roadway. If I look at here connection, I can see it's connected to center line. I could connect it to other things. I could connect it to the outside or a point code. I'll talk a little bit more about point codes in a second. So each of these components is connected. The ditch is not connected to center line. Let's just look at its connection. So it's connected to the outside, and it's told to try and match the subgrade surface. So if you're building up a template with a bunch of components, you have to be aware of how they're connected. And yeah, you can't always connect a component just to a point code. And there's some subtle reasons for that. Yeah, let me talk a little bit about point codes. So we saw that templates have parameters, and when the template's constructed, it creates different layers, and it also creates point codes. So if I just hover over this point here, you can see there's a bunch of point codes at that point. The squiggly ones usually mean they're not really mainstream template codes. So here, let's just look at this one, STIL. There's a point code, and if I wanted to attach something to that point code, I could, and I would go into the connection, change the connection to point code, and change that. The point codes are available. You can report them, and I'll show you a little bit more about some of the ways to work with point codes. One of the things, though, I wanted to say was that you can't always attach something to a point code. If you attached this slope line, if we go back up here, this slope line is attached. It looks like that slope line could just be attached to this point code, right? It says REL. However, if I come down here and the ditch component kicks in, attaching the slope to REL would not give me the result I wanted, because I'd have a slope coming from REL and heading off and covering the ditch. So it's generally useful to connect things on the outside of the template, and that's why this outside is there. You just have to be a little careful creating templates and making sure that instead of explicitly attaching them to point codes, you attach them to the outside. Yeah, just carrying on here. How are we doing for time? Oh boy, always run over time. So if you're desperate and boring, just depart, and we will have a complete video of this later. One of the things I wanted to show was subsurface layers. And the layers that I talked about were in the template. There are other layers that you can set up. And the way you do that is you go assign parameters by range, and you can add in situ layers. I'm not sure why this is so complicated, but let's just assign overburden, 2 meters of overburden on top of hard pan, and let's do it for the entire road. Let's do that. Recalculate it. By the way, you can do this also with a surface if you've got a more detailed surface from boreholes or whatever. Let's turn on the ground layer. You can see there is the ground layer that exists in the ground. Now this isn't really part of the template. This is just part of what exists out there. And of course, when you move into excuse me, when you move into a cut situation, it's tracking these materials by layer. And I think I misled you before that the surfacing layers wasn't layer 1, layer 2. Surfacing layers are in something else called SRF1 and SRF2. In any case, you can track all these volumes. So that would be your surfacing layers. Whereas layer 1, layer 2 volume is your cut volumes for the in situ materials. Okay, so one other thing in passing, stripping. It's pretty common to apply stripping, and that's actually not done in the template editor, or doesn't have to be done in the template editor. You can just go in here and assign stripping, site prep, apply that, the depth of stripping, And here I'm going to strip out to the slope stake base on the left and right on the outside. If you were doing a widening or some other sort of reconditioning type project, you might not strip from the center line. You might only strip from a shoulder point. There's lots of options there. So let's apply some stripping. And there we go. You can see that material there is being stripped out of the cross section. Again, it's not really part of the template, and its volume can be reported separately. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about point codes because they're very useful. So back to our template editor and our lane widening. They're both pretty much the same. And I look at this point here and I see it says ditch inside left as a point code. So now I want to look at that ditch inside left point code in my profile. So I right click in profile options, go to template codes here, click on the plus sign, add a template code, and I look for my REL. There it is. I'll give it a unique, I'm not a big yellow fan. I'm going to go with the blue and find something that's quite big and bold. So there's the line type selection for my ditch line, and let's just go ahead and see what that looks like. Oh, Aaron just pointed out what silliness I had done. Let's just go. Dear. Okay, template codes. I added the wrong point code. Thank you, Aaron. I added road edge left. Of course, it's everywhere. Let's go to find DIL. DIL. There we go. Add him. Let's get rid of road edge. DIL, again, blue, something big. Okay, there, that totally should explain it. That looks better. Okay, so there are my ditch lines in profile, and when I'm in a fill situation, there's no ditch because that's how that ditch component works. Okay, clock is ticking. The one other thing I wanted to try and do relatively quickly is take an example here, which is pretty common, and modify this ditch so that you can actually override the way it's forming. Because right now, if you look at the template, the ditch, doesn't matter which one, the widening of the ditches are the same. If we look at the ditch properties, it's forming a ditch at 1 meter, and it's looking to see if that point, 1 meter, is below ground. And then as soon as it goes below ground, it puts a ditch in. But I want to take control of this myself and force a ditch to have maybe a certain grade or some condition. One of the things about the ditch component is that once you start to manipulate it, you actually have to take away some of its intelligence before you can manipulate it. Otherwise, you kind of compete with it. So the way to do that is to create yet another component here, or sorry, template, and we'll call this what do I call it? Ditch override. Ditch override. There's the new template, and I'm going to replace the ditch that's in here. I'm going to go back to the eLibrary. I'm going to grab my ditch by elevation, and I'm going to right-click here, paste as new left. And of course, I had a left ditch in there already, so I have to get rid of that. So now I have one ditch, and we'll just have a look at this ditch. So it's got a default depth. It's a bit deeper than the one that was there. slopes, all that stuff is kind of standard here. It's got a bit of a bottom slope, maybe not on, or sorry, bottom width, and a bottom slope. That's probably a 0. This parameter here for this component, ditch by elevation, this parameter here is what you can override and force the ditch to match an elevation. And that's the key thing about this component. The downside of using this component is that it forms a ditch all the time. It takes that depth. So like I say, by applying this component, you actually are telling the software you're going to take control and create this ditch. So let's just go ahead and do that. I did this in advance. So I'm going to assign that template, assign parameters by range, templates. I'm going to add my ditch override, and I came up with, for no particular reason, 650 to 6620 ditch override. And what else? That's it for here. So 6050. There, you can kind of see it. It's jogging down because the ditch depth was deeper than the other ditch. Like this is one template in here. Just look at that. Go to template editor, edit templates. So that's the rural highway. If we go into this section of road here, click on a point, edit templates, and we're in the ditch override section. And the ditch is by default a little bit deeper, so we're seeing it. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually override this depth so I don't get that jog and I just get some sort of transition. So it's quite simple. You go into assign parameters by range and go to the overrides tab. You have to find that parameter, which I call ditch elevation. You have to know this. You have to read up in the component documentation, ditch elevation. And then I'm going to add an override. I'm going to say at station 650, say station 6050. I'm going to, instead of using the default, I'm going to set it to an elevation, which I predetermined would be reasonable, 228, 228.6 I wrote down. And then I'm going to override it also at station 6620, and I got an elevation for it there. So I can set in this range of stations where I've assigned this template, I can set elevations anywhere I want and control how the ditch works. There's other ways to control the ditch, but this is pretty straightforward. So there it is.
Craig, I'm just going to stop you for 1 second. We do have a question, and again, apologies for the echo here on my voice. The question is, what's the difference between this ditch template and just setting the template to include the ditch, as opposed to auto-calculate?
Good question. Let me come back to that just to finish what I was illustrating here. So we've actually lowered the ditch line by overriding those elevations. We overrode an elevation here. We overrode one down here, making the ditch deeper as we came down this slope. But back to your question, the differences are subtle between the two components. As I mentioned, this ditch by elevation is more controllable. You can override the elevation explicitly, setting it to whatever you want, whereas this ditch elevation here, if you were to override it, which you can do as well, you can just set the ditch depth parameter. It's just a little harder to work with, and also it will not form a ditch unless this point's underground. If you're doing a lot of ditch overriding, I think I think it's better to use this other component, but you can work with this one. The ditch is actually kind of tricky. It comes up a fair amount, people trying to control their ditches and get it to do things. And we've done quite a bit of work recently to add some smarter components, for instance, components which will look at this point here, the outside ditch point, and determine if that's underground, and just generally try to make the component smarter so that you don't have to do this overriding to force ditches and so on. Did I answer your question very well? Not sure if there's an easy way for you to respond. While I wait for that, and come back to it, while I wait for that, I'll just close off here with what my final thing that I wanted to show you, which is kind of the sledgehammer approach, and that is something called fixed sections. So you've gone and you've done as much as you can with these templates. You fooled around, but something's just not working, and you're getting frustrated, and maybe you're calling us up and you feel like you're bugging us. There reaches a point where you might want to say, I don't care. I want to change this section the way I want it, because my alignment's all finalized. Everything's good. I'm just now, let's finish it off. So we have a thing called the section editor. Start that up here, and I can create one or many sections. Let's just create a bunch of them. So I'll do the whole road, and I'll create sections at a 20-meter spacing, auto interval, which is what my auto interval points were. Go ahead and do that. Oh, and one thing that's important is to turn on the starter range. Goes ahead, it locks down all these sections, which means you shouldn't change the alignment, or the sections may not make a whole lot of sense. But when they're locked down and fixed, you can actually go in, you can go through these sections just by clicking on them here. See them? They're exactly the same as your template, but they're fixed, and they say fixed at the top. And the key thing about them is that you can go in here and edit them. So you can grab these points. You can do anything you want, very much manually, but you have all the power. You're not using any logic or smart template components. You're just changing them the way you want. And if you have only a few of these, it's quite simple. You just change them, and it's kind of your ultimate way to control the cross section. But if you've got 5 miles or 10 kilometers or whatever of road, and you don't want to be going through all these sections, changing them manually. So I would say to use this technique sparingly, not something you want to mess around with if you've got a big road project. That ends my presentation. Unless there's any questions, I'll pass it back to Erin.
Great. Thank you very much, Craig. We'll just hang around for a couple minutes here, see if there are any additional questions through the GoToWebinar panel. We have answered a number of them directly. And of course, if you have a question you want to ask it after the fact, you can send it over to support@softree.com, and we can correspond over email. And if there's no questions, feel free to jump off. Oh, we've got a couple coming in here. Craig, your first question. Are the manual changes in the fixed section just for visual, or do those reflect changes in volumes?
Change in volumes, absolutely. Let's just illustrate that. Yeah, it's not just a pretty picture. Let's do something goofy here, which I'm good at doing. Yeah, let's just put wacky change in here. There you go. Not exactly your typical road. And then if I highlight the cut areas, there you go. There's my cut, and it's changed according to the changes I've made. Does that answer your question? I think it should. Yeah, the answer is yes. Volume,
so,
yes.
We do have another question regarding the section editor. Can the section editor be used only in a specific range and break down within the range?
Yes. Yes, that is in fact the way you would most likely use it. Most of the road is good, but you're down here, I don't know, something, maybe a culvert or maybe a bridge area, something that requires some messing around, and you're tired and don't want to fiddle with overriding slopes and components and things like that. So you would just lock down a range. And let me remove this, just show that. So I get rid of all those sections, and it'll go back to being a template which moves around there. It's all done. And let's add a section range. So instead of whole road, I'm going to go from section 4,000 to 5,000, or smaller. It could be 2 or 3 sections. In fact, I could just add a single section where I want. So let me just do this. Finish that. So now there's a range of sections between those ranges, and I can mess around with those ones, or even 1 or 2. There's an important point here, though, with fixed sections, in that the actual volumes are calculated. I've got this set to down here. It says start of range, which really means ignore anything between these 2 sections in your volume calculation. Calculate the equal or the end area at this station, calculate the end area at that station, and do an end area calc ignoring sections that were in between. So when you do these things, you've got to be aware of that. If you don't have that start of range turned on, or points between fixed sections, you actually get a fixed section, and then if you go forward, we're actually in between. We have a funny little section in there. I'm not sure, but we get different sections that were created. So there was actually 2 sections between the fixed section. Most construction people and most people want the sections to be distinct stationing, like a 20-meter spacing or 50-foot spacing or 25-foot spacing, whatever. So yeah, you can do this for a range. You can do it for a single section as well. It's very flexible. Other things you can do with the fixed section editor, and it's a subject of another seminar, is calculate quantities, as-built quantities, things like that, where you instead of using a template, you create surfaces and you edit the surfaces and tie them off and do things like that for as-built quantity calculations. Or if you need to stockpiles, all sorts of things that require control on the section, and you can use this fixed section editor to do that. Other questions?
That's it so far. Oh, and of course another one comes in. Are the order of the items in the template carried over into the breakdowns shown upon customizing an item?
Not sure if I know what that means, but I'll try. So, I'm not sure what you mean by customizing an item. The order of the templates is only really important. The only significance of it is in the construction of the template geometry itself. Once that geometry has been completed, all the volumes, point codes, everything else, I didn't show you here, but you can create a new data window. In here I'll put point codes, columns. Let's remove some of these. And this is completely independent of the template components. Everything else, oh, sorry, I have to do one thing first. I have to set them up in here. So I can make a list. I want centerline point code. I want my good old DIL. I make a list of what ones I want to report, maybe for slope staking, construction, whatever. Add those into my window, recalc, and then add them as columns. Kind of a two-step process. Here they all are. And so for each point code, I can report the horizontal offset, vertical offset, coordinates, elevation. So let's just say I want center line XYZ and ditch inside XYZ. You get the idea. I'll just put a few of them in here. Get the concept. So there are all the coordinates of those. Oops, all the coordinates of those point codes. And here at this station here, there's no ditch, so we're not getting anything appearing in the window. There's no ditch on the left. There was a ditch on the right. Yeah, so that is completely independent of the order in which the template component is built. By the way, this is sort of getting out of topic, but you can copy this data window clipboard and just paste it into Excel if you want. All this stuff, all the windows, everything is completely configurable, and it's independent of the order in which the template was created. So I think I answered your question, I hope. Let's paste that in here. There. Other questions?
I think that's it, Craig. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for the webinar. Thank you, Craig, for the detailed coverage of template parameters and template components. And hopefully everyone else will join us for a future webinar. Have a great Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.